Welcome back to Introduction to Engineering Design. This is Module 7.4, and we're starting to work on Part 2 of assembling the T9 truck bed for the Automobilex model. So first we're going to start out with Subassembly 1, and you'll notice in the instructions, which I have shown on my screen, that you are to make 4 subassemblies. Subassembly 1 is the bed with 2 axles and the connecting socket. Subassembly 2 is the front with 2 axles and the connecting socket. Subassembly 3 is the midsection with the 2 connecting sockets and the passenger base. And then subassembly 4 is the T9 wheel and tire. And then finally what we'll do is we'll combine all of these together along with the windscreen, and we will make a finished model. So we'll do this in 5 different videos. So let's start out with subassembly 1, the T9 bed and the axles. So in SOLIDWORKS, before we get started, you'll notice that on my desktop I have my T9 Automobilex folder, and what I've done is I downloaded the zip file and I unpacked these. I put them on my desktop. You can put them in your documents or wherever you would like. So I've got all of the files required to make my parts. This is also where I'm going to put my assembly documents in here, and you can see I've already built some of these assemblies, but I'm going to do it again for you. So let's start out by making the first subassembly. This subassembly is going to consist of the bed, the axles, and the 1 block socket. Remember, the first thing we're going to put in is the predominant or the defining part of the assembly. So I'm going to make a new assembly and say OK. I'll browse to where my parts are, and I'm going to open up the T9 bed. Open that, and you'll notice that it comes into view. 2 things happen here. Because I've got the show rotate context toolbar here, because I've got that button selected, I can go ahead and freely rotate rotate my T9 body. I want to make it so that the aft portion of the body is facing to the right hand side. So let's first rotate it once about the x-axis. Sorry, one more time there. And now let's spin it around the y-axis. And that's the way I want to orient this particular model. Once I've done that, I'm going to hover over and click on my check mark. And that places the T9 bed as a fixed object, denoted by the F. Right here. And it is placed at the origin. So when I look at the origin, and I show my origin right here, so let me show the origin. Sorry. There is my origin as I hover over. You can see the dot in the body is centered on that dot. Okay, let's insert the other components. I need 2 axles and a 1 block socket. So I'm going to go ahead and go browse, and I'm going to choose my axle, and I only really need to choose it once. I don't care about the orientation. I'm going to drop it. You'll notice that it is not fully constrained. It's got the minus symbol. I can move it around, so when I grab it I can move it. I'm going to insert one more component. I want to insert the 1 block socket. Come down here, T9 1 block socket. And again, same thing. I'm going to go ahead and drop that in. And I'm going to rotate that once about the y-axis, actually a couple times here, just to make it a little more convenient to locate. So let's start constraining my model. So this portion of the axle is the peg that fits into the hole of the model. So let's start with that. So I'll click on my Mate tab, or my Mate button in the Assembly tab, and I'm going to go ahead and choose the shaft of my axle, and I'm going to choose the corresponding hole. You'll notice that it goes immediately for a concentric relationship. I'm going to flip my mate alignment so that my axle is sticking out, and what I've basically commanded here is I have commanded and aligned, or in other words, those 2 pieces are facing the same way. Go ahead and accept that, and you'll notice that my axle is constrained, except it moves in and out and it rotates. So at this point, I'm going to mate the shoulder of the axle to the side of the body. That is a coincident mate. You'll notice that I could do a distance also, a distance of 0. That would be the same as coincident. And if I exit out of my mates, you'll see that that axle is still underdefined. The reason is because it rotates here. It rotates. So I can come back down to this mate where I've got my concentric. I can right-click on that, and I can lock the rotation. That locks the rotation in place. Now let me go ahead and turn that off here. I'm going to unlock the rotation and let it rotate because I really want to orient it in a specific direction. So let me show you something. In every SOLIDWORKS models, there are planes that you cannot see unless you turn them on. So I'm going to go ahead and choose some of the planes within this axle. So here's my axle. Expand that in the design tree. And I want to turn on, let's say, the top plane so that I can see that top plane. So I highlight that to see it, and then I go View, select Planes. Similarly, I'm going to select the planes in my model of the truck bed, and I'm going to select the front plane. What I'm going to do is I'm going to perform a mate between the front plane and the top plane so that they are parallel. Once I perform that mate, you're going to notice that my axle is fully defined. It no longer rotates. So instead of just locking it in place, what I did was align the slots up just for appearances. A little bit OCD, but it works. So I put one axle in, and you say, well, I need another axle. How do I get a second axle in? I could either come up to Insert Components, choose that component, or I could simply grab the axle from my tree, hold down my Control key, and drag it in. And I get that axle going back in. So same thing. I'm going to go ahead and mate this using a concentric mate from the shaft into the axle hole. Actually, I have to turn mates on. Axle hole, shaft. Change my alignment, so I'm going to go ahead and flip this so that it is aligned in that direction. Pull it to this side just so it's a little easier for me to see. Go with the shoulder of the axle to the side of the car. Accept that, and then align the top plane of the axle to the front plane of the model parallel. Or the front plane of the bed, rather, parallel. So now I've got two axles in the bed. So similarly, I'm going to use some planes in this particular instance. Well, let me show you an easy way to do this first. There's a fairly easy, simple way. The way that this piece fits inside of the model itself is this corner basically sits inside of this corner, and it sits flush. So that's kind of the way that this is modeled. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to mate the surface front edge to the front edge, and I want them to be aligned. So you'll see right here, I've got the aligned tab. And then I want to go ahead and mate this left side to the left side as I face it. And I've mated that. And now you're going to notice that this piece still moves up and down, but otherwise it's fully constrained. So the last thing I need to do is to mate this top, and I want the top surface to the top of the block where it goes. And now you'll see that I'm fully defined with the first axle, axle 1, axle 2, the one block socket, and the bed, all fully defined. Now if I don't want to see those planes anymore, go ahead and View, and I can turn off the planes. Conversely, I could also come over here, right-click the plane, click the eyeglass to hide it. Okay, that's subassembly number 1. So let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to call it Subassembly 1. So you'll notice that I saved that in the same folder as the parts. into my T9 block. That's it for subassembly number 1. Thanks for watching.